In the unforgiving world of medieval warfare, survival was never about honor or gallantry. It was about efficiency, the cold, brutal efficiency of ending a fight with speed and finality. The modern imagination, saturated with images of noble knights and ceremonial duels, often masks the grim truth of medieval combat. Battles weren't contests of nobility. They were violent, strategic clashes where survival demanded more than strength or skill. It demanded the right weapon tool, not just designed to kill, but to dominate, to maim, to crush, and to make absolutely certain the enemy could never rise again. As armor evolved, becoming increasingly resilient and comprehensive, the battlefield saw the birth of new weapons engineered not for beauty or heroism, but for pragmatism. Gone were the days when slashing swords reigned supreme. Now, the most effective instruments of war were those that exploited the smallest weaknesses in a suit of plate or found ways to render armor irrelevant altogether. In this essay, we will take a deep dive into 3 such weapons: the boar spear, the Lucerne hammer, and the bec de Corbin. Each was forged with a singular, merciless purpose, not simply to defeat the enemy, but to obliterate their capacity to resist. The boar spear is often overlooked in popular depictions of medieval weaponry. Overshadowed by the glittering swords and massive battle-axes favored in legend, it lacks the flamboyance to command attention. But that very absence of spectacle is what made the boar spear so terrifying in the hands of a trained fighter. Its design originated from the dangerous sport of hunting wild. Boars notorious for charging hunters even when mortally wounded. Such beasts demanded a weapon capable of delivering a decisive, immobilizing blow, while also protecting the wielder. At first glance, the boar spear appears simple. A long wooden shaft usually 6 to 8 feet in length, topped with a sturdy leaf-shaped steel blade. But it is the crossguard behind the blade, often a pair of lateral lugs or wings, that transforms this hunting tool into a battlefield horror. These lugs served a critical function. Once the spear was driven into a target, the wings would catch against the body, halting the forward motion and preventing overpenetration. This design helped the wielder retain control of the weapon, cruciate in close combat where losing your spear could mean instant death. When adapted for warfare, especially during the late Middle Ages, the boar spear became a weapon of terrifying control. It was often used by infantrymen tasked with defending tight corridors, gates, and other choke points. There, in the brutal crush of battle, the spear's utility shone. Infantry could form dense walls of spears, using them to skewer advancing foes or halt cavalry charges. Against a mounted knight, the boar spear's reach and stopping power could be deadly. A soldier bracing his spear against the ground could aim directly at an oncoming rider, letting the horse's momentum do the fatal work. The psychological component of this weapon cannot be overstated. Unlike an archer safely distanced from his target, or a swordsman who could rely on reach and movement, the user of a boar spear had to stand their ground, align the point, and hold steady under pressure. It was a test of nerve and discipline. Misthrust or insufficient penetration meant the enemy was still coming. There was no margin for error. Historical records, particularly from castle sieges and urban street battles, describe units of soldiers wielding boar spears behind shield walls, waiting to deliver precise, lethal strikes after the initial clash. Their role was less glamorous than the vanguard, but no less vital. They were the finishing line, the last thing a charging enemy saw before being brought to a brutal stop. The boar spear lacked the ceremonial significance of a knight's sword. It was not blessed or engraved or used in rituals. It was not meant to awe or inspire. It was practical, cold, and brutally effective. Its use was not artful, but mathematical, a calculation of force, distance, and anatomy. In a world where elegance had little place, the boar spear thrived. As metallurgy advanced in the 14th and 15th centuries, so too did the armor worn by professional soldiers and knights. Plate armor reached an apex of effectiveness, offering near-total protection against the slashes and stabs of traditional weapons. The sight of a knight in full harness was enough to demoralize an unarmored footman. But as always in warfare, advancement breeds adaptation. The Lucerne hammer was one such adaptation, a weapon forged not just to counter armor, but to break it. Originating in the Swiss cantons during the late medieval period, the Lucerne hammer combined reach, versatility, and devastating power, ranging between 5 and 7 feet in length. This polearm featured a multifaceted head that offered several methods of attack. One side bore a multi-pronged hammer face, often with 4 blunt flanges capable of denting or caving in steel. The opposite side carried a curved beak-like spike for armor-piercing precision. And at the top of the head, a steel spear point allowed for powerful thrusts in close quarters. This triple-headed versatility made the Lucerne hammer a weapon of tactical genius. The blunt face could be used to stun or cripple, crushing limbs or cracking helmets. The beak, with its concentrated impact zone, is ideal for finding and penetrating weaknesses in armor, armpits, joints, neck gaps. The spear point allowed for overhead thrusting attacks, particularly effective when fighting from elevated positions or behind fortifications. The weapon thrived in formation combat. It was used by disciplined infantry, often in Swiss or German armies, who trained in coordinated movement and spacing. Against cavalry, a well-timed swing could unhorse a rider or cripple the mount. In siege warfare, where enemies scaled ladders or stormed narrow entryways, the Lucerne hammer-esque capacity to deliver disabling blows through shields or into helmet visors made it an ideal choice. I like the symbolic weapons of the nobility. The Lucerne hammer carried no ceremonial value. It wasn't a weapon to be shown off in court or used in knightly tournaments. It was a working tool, functional, ugly, and frighteningly effective. It spoke not of lineage, but of function. It was a weapon of the common soldier, the professional fighter, the mercenary. Its real power lay in the psychological shift it represented. The knight in gleaming armor, once thought invincible, now faced a very real threat from a peasant with the right tool and enough training. Lucerne hammer democratized lethality. It tore through illusions of invulnerability and reminded even the most elite fighters that no armor was truly safe. Among the most feared weapons of the late medieval battlefield was the bec de Corbin, or raven's beak. Named for its menacing downward curved spike, the bec de Corbin was a focused evolution of the warhammer. And Polaxa tool, designed not for sweeping attacks or area control, but for precise clinical destruction. The weapon typically measured 5 to 6 feet in length and bore 3 distinct components: a hammer face for delivering concussive force, the iconic beak spike for puncturing armor, and a top-mounted spike for thrusting. Together, these features made it one of the most anatomically effective weapons of its era. While the hammer could shatter bones beneath mail or dent breastplates, the beak was the true terror. Unlike a sword which might glance off armor, the bec de Corbin delivered all the kinetic energy of a swing into a pinpoint armor-penetrating strike. The beak was designed to find the weaknesses. It slipped into visor slits, pierced underarm gaps, crushed collarbones, and hooked behind knees. Even the best-designed armor had to allow for movement, and these articulation points were precisely what the bec de Corbin targeted. Its solid, narrow construction meant that, unlike swords or axes, it wouldn't get stuck in bone or metal. A blow could be followed up instantly, repeatedly, and with horrifying accuracy. Its versatility extended to grappling techniques. A skilled fighter could use the beak to hook an enemy's arm or neck, pulling them off balance or to the ground. Once disoriented, a follow-up hammer strike could incapacitate or kill. These hooking motions made the weapon especially useful in close quarters, such as during siege breaches, stairwell fights, or castle interiors where mobility was limited and raw power was paramount. The bec de Corbin became a favorite among elite infantry and dismounted knights, particularly those tasked with breaking enemy lines or neutralizing heavily armored foes. Its presence on the battlefield signaled a sobering reality. This was not a fight for glory. It was a methodical dismantling of the enemy, perhaps more than any other weapon. The bec de Corbin symbolized the transition from romanticized warfare to a calculated science of destruction. It wasn't wielded with flair or grandeur. It was used with understanding of anatomy, of armor, of technique. It embodied a philosophy of combat that was precise, brutal, and unapologetically effective. The medieval battlefield was not a place of honor, but of necessity. The weapons that defined this world were not those of legends, but those of survival. The boar spear, the Lucerne hammer, and the bec de Corbin were not created for ceremony, but for certainty. Each was a product of adaptation, a reflection of a time when the difference between life and death could be measured in inches of steel, seconds of timing, or the depth of a single punishing thrust. They were not weapons of show, were not wielded for poetry or glory. They were wielded to make absolutely certain that the person standing in front of you would never stand again. In the brutal arithmetic of medieval combat, they were the most unforgiving tools of the trade, and their legacy is a cold reminder of the reality behind the myth.